Welcome to Women at Halftime podcast, but not just for women, for you men too. If you're at mid-career or the halftime of life, our inspirational topics are not only fun, but also meant to help you maximize and write your next chapter. Right here with me, Deborah Johnson. Well, hello everyone. Today back with my husband, Greg, and we are on together with a great subject, the life transitions for an athlete. And for those of you who are maybe tuning in for the first time, you may not know what Greg's background is as a professional athlete, but this is a very relevant subject for professional athletes, young and old. But we are going to kind of focus on his time of life and some of because the principles are transferable. So thanks for being with me today,
Sure.
Greg.
Good to see everybody.
Yes, always fun to be together. We are together once a month on this podcast, Women at Halftime. And we're going to talk about a couple principles today on the mindset, the workarounds, and consistency. And first of all, tell us what your background as a professional athlete kind of.
Well, I was a minor league baseball player for 3.5 years. And, prior to that, I played 4 years in college. So I had gotten swept up in the training and the year-round activity involved in being a professional sports person. Right.
And when we met, you were just at the end of your professional athlete career as you hurt your arm, played up to AAA. But you were also in the College World Series. So that was a pretty big deal when you were playing in college. But these principles, we identified so much even as a couple because we understood the performance aspect, because I've been in music performance. A lot of the principles crossed right over in not being able to do what you used to do and how to deal with those mindsets. So we're going to talk first of all about the mindsets and the fear that sets in. And can you expound a little bit on that, on some of the things at this point of life that you were going through?
One of the aspects of being an athlete is generally you can figure out how to do something. And you also don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about just daily activities. You're by definition, slightly more coordinated than the general population. And should I go into the story of the last 5 years?
Yeah. I think that would be an interesting one to
start.
So
up until 2017, which we're recording this in 2022, I had stayed in pretty good shape and was still playing full court basketball with kids in their 20s and 30s. And I developed a sore on the bottom of my big toe, and to make a real long story short, the end joint got infected. The surgeon dealt with the infection just by going in and taking out the infection. I laid off my foot for 8 weeks, thought everything would be fine, but my left, the leg that they had operated on had atrophied, and pretty much because I had stopped running, so had the good leg. So when I came back, I was kind of suddenly flat-footed and everything, and I was trying to get back in shape, and back in shape is going to be the operative term here. Mm-hmm. And then the sore came back. And what we discovered is while they had dealt with the symptom, they never dealt with the cause. And the cause ended up being a bone spur on the bottom of my big toe. So a year and a half later, just before COVID, I had to have the bone spur removed and another 8 weeks laying off. And by this time, my ankles were kind of weak. I was walking flat-footed. I couldn't even jog. And when your ankles get weak, it affects your balance. Oh, and also, when they took the infection out of the big toe, they took part of the cartilage at the end of my big toe, and it affected my balance. So I have trouble balancing. I couldn't jog. Means I was gaining weight. I'd laid off, and I was getting less flexible. So it was an interesting 5-year period of time where I went from playing full court basketball with young kids to where, now, a hike is a terrible adventure.
Yeah, and we talked about, we could have titled this From Full Court Basketball to Pickleball. And how, but you're even struggling sometimes with the pickleball because of the movements, so there's a definite mindset there and how you deal with this. And we're going to focus on this one. We'll probably do another couple episodes on this because of even the younger athletes, and I'm calling younger in their 30s and 40s, because there are transitions that are fairly similar, just the circumstances are a little bit different, but there are mindsets that you need to deal with. And this is, I think, an important area to approach. And it's what I've had to approach also as an artist. So, but as an athlete, and especially, I am not an athlete at all, and Greg will say amen to that. But I do understand the athletic mindset and the push and the drive and the training that you have to be at that performance level. So in talking about some of this with the mindsets, there's fear that happens. And I remember your comment, because if you followed me at all, we were in South Africa a couple months ago now at least. I get it. I'm losing track of time, how long ago. But we took this one hike that was, it was at the Cape. So
Cape of Good Hope.
Yeah, Cape of Good Hope. And we went up this huge mountain, and then we came down. There were no rails, and there were huge stones that we came down. And Greg's comment at the bottom of that was one of the most stupid things I've ever done because there was nowhere to hang on. The balance issue for you. Now I sat down on some of those steps because they were steep, but I went ahead and sat down and just kind of, took my time going down. But those thoughts were not going through my mind because my physical, I was different. And, You're a lot bigger. Your feet are bigger. They're good size 14s. So they were bigger and all of that. So, but that fear, and even taking a hike, of what you did. But you mentioned something very important as a mindset is to keep moving, and explain that a little bit, keep your momentum.
Well, so the whole experience, I had trained for this in terms of walking. So my conditioning was fine. I didn't get tired. But something I discovered on the way down is they had fairly deep steps, but they were also, the step down. And what it brought out was that, one, not only was my balance not very good, and these steps, if you fell, it wasn't like you fell on a flat piece of earth. It wasn't a cliff, but it was down a canyon. So there was no handrails, and if you fall, you're going to roll down, 10, 20 feet. Yeah. And then you got to climb back up. So fear enters your mind, and so balance was a problem. The other thing that the hike exposed is that on my hips, as an athlete, generally speaking, I could step down 2 feet maybe, and that wouldn't be a problem. And here, I was stepping down maybe 1.5 feet, and I felt like I needed to turn sideways to do it. And so the first thing that you kind of go with is, I'm afraid. And then you need to quickly move to assessing. Okay.
Yes.
What skills do I have? And we'll probably get into this in a little bit.
Yeah.
What skills do I have? What do I need to work around? And, how can I best succeed in this situation, right. Which was physically dangerous. So Deb brought up momentum. And one of the things I figured out is if I stopped at the top of the step and tried to just step down, it was steeper than but I was being careful. what I noticed though is that if I stepped longer out onto the step, try to imagine this, it when my foot landed, it wasn't as deep down. This going straight down was like this. If I stepped out, this angle, but that required me to keep going.
Yes.
You know, I had to keep momentum going and keep these long strides going down these stairs with nowhere to fall. Yeah. And you know, I had to make a decision to overcome my fear and do the momentum thing. And the only disadvantage of the momentum was if you want to stop and you're moving forward, now all of a sudden I have to balance on one foot for a moment to stop myself. So there, you know, for something as simple as walking down steps, there was a lot of complicated emotions going on.
And concentration. But one of the things, the next point we're going to get to, we're going to and fear is going to be interspersed in here, and our mindset is going to be, because it's a lot about mindset.
Yep.
But workarounds. And I wanted to review what you just spoke about with your workaround, because you are trained as an athlete. You knew what to do. And sometimes we know what to do and we don't do it. But you knew by stepping forward more. It's like me just sitting on the step. Okay, so that was my workaround. But for you, the workaround was taking that larger step and keeping the momentum going. Right. Slow still, but keeping the momentum going. So sometimes in all of this, we have to realize there are workarounds and they will work for us. But we have to understand what our past training was and how to apply that to our life. Any other comment on that?
Well, I know when we talked about workarounds, one that came up is I was a pitcher. And on some days, everything was firing on all cylinders, and you could go out and throw the ball as hard as you wanted to. Your curveball worked the way it was supposed to. You could throw it, all your pitches where you wanted them to go. It was great. Most of the time, one of those things wasn't true. You couldn't get the ball to the location you wanted it to. Your fastball was not a fastball. It was more like a dud ball. and so, but the point wasn't to show off. The point was to win. So you had to develop some sort of workaround. You had to adapt to what your skill levels and sets were that day.
Right.
And then determined, you know, in practice to work on some things so that perhaps you can be a little bit more consistent in maintaining your pitches. So when we talk about workarounds, what we're talking about is figuring out how to succeed in life, even though all the circumstances aren't lining up quite the right way. In this case of climbing down the mountain, a handrail would have really helped. That would have been a circumstance that would have made this walk much more enjoyable.
But that's not going to happen there.
Having hips that were flexible enough to step down without having to leave my feet. You know, if you've got one foot on the step behind you and another foot on the step in front of you, there's a lot of security. But when your hip doesn't release enough and there's, 6 inches that you have to clear before and then balance when you hit the ground, fear intervenes. And so those are circumstances, and you had to come up with a workaround. And one of the things we want to talk about today is generally fear will butt up against your ability to create workarounds.
Yes.
And if you fall to the fear, then you never work on the things that'll move you forward.
Right.
So what we have applied is that in life, generally you need to assess what's causing your fear, and then develop some way to adapt, so that your fear doesn't hold you back, but based on a fair assessment of where you're at right now, you can do 2 things. 1, move ahead. 2, develop a plan for how to get better.
Right.
So since we've gotten back from Africa, I've been working on all sorts of hip flexor exercises to see if I can, regain some of my flexibility.
Yeah, it showed that up, I'm really glad that you brought all of that up, because it shows us some of those areas. And
Yeah, life has a unique way of showing you where your weaknesses are. And if life doesn't do it, your competition will.
It totally will. And as you were relating that story, this vivid illustration of the time I had to do a wonderful concert. It was a huge concert, and I had a cold, and so I was not going to be able to hit that money note, but I would have to hit an alternate note. Now, most of the audience would never know. They just didn't. In fact, they didn't know even that what I was struggling with.
But you quickly assessed where you were,
yes.
and you adapted a plan in order to succeed.
And my training, my consistent training, helped me get through with the right type of breath, pacing myself. I had brought the hot water. I had done all of those things that had been in those training to be able to prepare for that. And I think many who are in performance fields, all of a sudden it's this shock when you get, it's like, what happened to the body? And what was the comment that you made? I think it was just yesterday to one of our sons who, and Greg says, yeah, I'm eating right, I'm doing everything. And then Daniel says, well, have you dropped weight? And Greg says, no. It's this reality that the body is just different. And your body's going to be at a different stage. So, but those are some of those workarounds, accepting it. And as a later episode that we will approach in the younger athlete, but some of those younger athletes have not accepted this, and they're in depression, and it can bring depression if you're not able to accept what is happening and not find something else that is totally meaningful to be able to push forward with that same sort of intensity. So, so we've touched on that mindset and some workarounds, and there are other workarounds here, but I'm going to talk about consistency too, because they're all intertwined. And because you talked about the type of training that you are doing now and how important it was for balance. And you mentioned a couple things with the, type of exercises that you were doing, stretching and balance. Now, how many listening to this who are in your 20s, maybe 30s, if any of you are out there listening at that stage of life. But the focus of my working out at that stage was not stretching and balance. No, it was intensity. It was, going full on.
It was running long distances or developing strength.
Yes, exactly. So, but that kind of changes, and that's a little bit of a workaround. This is why I'm wanting to keep as long as we can at our stage is to book some of these trips that we have a bike riding trip coming up. We are both training for that now, and there can be a certain amount of fear when you fall off of a bike, okay? But understanding, just getting into the shape and keeping your balance and keeping everything else going and your stamina going to train for that, to understand what it takes to do that. And I'm not an athlete, but I'm definitely training for that. So let's talk a little bit about consistency and the importance of keeping that consistency going with some of your workarounds.
Well, so consistency is, whether it's, you're talking about showing up for work, saving money, or exercise is, just the key to everything. Yeah. And one of the mindsets I've had to adapt is that working on my balance and flexibility is like a new part-time job. It's something I have to give 20 or 30 minutes to a day in order to increase and try to get back, some of what I lost. Now, the way I've squeezed it in is what I do is in between sets on weights, instead of just standing around, I'll be stretching or I'll be doing a balance exercise. So instead of, wasting, a minute, I can stand on a balance ball for a minute and work on my balance. Or I can, get on the floor and stretch my hip flexors. So there's ways to incorporate it, but still, it just becomes another thing that you have to do. But, anybody will tell you can't get more flexible concentrating on it for a week. it's going to take 6 months.
Yeah, that's what we always want to do. We just want to be better. We want to be better tomorrow.
Yeah, and at some point, it seems like gravity is against us, once we get past 50. Mm-hmm. And so, even thinking in terms of 6 months, I don't know that you can make it a short-term goal anymore. I think you have to just incorporate it as part of your lifestyle.
Yeah.
When I was in my 30s, I could go on a week-long diet and lose 5 pounds. And as our son was pointing out the other day, I'm now riding 15 miles on my bike and doing a weight workout and not losing any weight. And, somehow those pounds just kind of stick to you at this age. And, not only is stretching and balance got to be a lifestyle, eating is kind of got to be a lifestyle. So things that you could sort of get away with when you were younger, you just can't anymore. I remember, my 30s, that if I didn't get all my work done, I had plenty of energy to go another 2-3 hours. At this stage, a 20-minute nap is a necessity. So you gotta figure out a way to adapt, to develop a workaround. You got to be smarter, and if we were good at using our time back when we were fully engaged, we really need to be good at using our time now.
Yeah. And I think for those people that are listening that are former athletes or in the performance field, don't lose your desire to win. In my very first book, I interviewed one of our neighbors that was bitten by a couple Rottweilers. Okay, this was but that neighbor was not going to stay down when she was told that she couldn't walk away again. She wasn't an athlete, but she kept active her whole life. She did walk. She walked that neighborhood, and you can tell I was sure she was in pain. Had chemo, and did this. She kept going, still keeps going. And I think there's a certain drive. You can't give up. And that's part of the consistency. Number one, you have to start. You can't not have some sort of plan. And if you need to hire a trainer, if you need to have somebody help you, if you need to have a buddy, whatever you need to do it. And keep moving. One of the biggest things as you gracefully grow older, as we gracefully grow older, is to keep moving. And we do encourage each other on that. And I keep booking these trips that we're going to have to be active on, I think. Yeah. But, after this last one, we're going, okay, that was a challenge. So, but I decided on one of the bike rides not to do it because I knew it was probably going to be beyond me, and I'm so glad I did.
Right.
I did everything else, but there was, you have to make that sort of conscious decision, even though I'm so very competitive in that area. But you have to keep moving and keep going forward, finding something. I don't spend the time that you do on stretching and balance. The balance doesn't seem to be as much of a problem for me, but my wind is, which is surprising because I've been a singer. You think, oh, you got amazing lungs. No, this is why we hear some of those singers with that vibrato I say that you can drive a truck through. That's, the breath for me is hard. And that's where the stamina that I work on with even some of my pushing myself on a bike and to be able to do more repetitions to just keep developing with so you have to understand your body. And you have to put yourself on some sort of a program that will work. And you were able to recuperate quite a bit. What I called it the year of the toe, by the way. If you've read one of my books, there's a whole chapter on the year of the toe in the Women at Halftime book. But it was a mindset of getting beyond that, that sort of obstacle, especially for a professional athlete. But you're on that little scooter, and everything gets out of place a little
bit. I think one of the things we talked about is when we were younger, if I got injured, you could kind of anticipate getting back to full speed in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And as you get older, the injuries, at least in my case, I never got back to where I was before. So it accelerated my decline. And now you're trying to discipline yourself to get back to some sort of shadow of your former self, and that's a whole thing that we could deal with in terms of the temptations to be depressed.
Yes.
But you can only do what you can do. Right. So you got to figure out what is my capacity now, and one of the things we have an advantage of is being past athletes is we know how to discipline ourselves. We know how to train. We know what the consistencies, and we know how to develop a plan. I think a lot of people try to train without a plan, and in order to be truly consistent, you need to first start with a plan,
right,
so you can execute the plan.
Right.
And that works for your business as well as your personal training.
I am so glad that you brought that up, because that principle of knowing how to train. You definitely know how to train. And before COVID hit, I was going to the gym. Now I work out. I've got a whole other workout system going that we developed in our own home here. But you still go to the gym. But I had workout cards.
Yeah.
Greg trained me, and it was like his training was good. It was helping me be consistent. But it was a plan. But I had never grown up with any sort of training like that, but it
yes,
really
you had, because in piano.
Yes, no, I had in that area, but not in my physical area.
Right, like but this. It's the same thing.
It's the same principle, and of developing that plan. And that should encourage anyone who has been, who is at that stage of life. You know how to train. I will repeat that. You know how to train. And watching athletes in these games, it's amazing. You think, how did they do that? Because they've done it 100,000 times, done that same slide in, done that same. Yep. They've hit that ball exactly the same. And watching you at a baseball game or being with you is quite something, because you understand what the pitcher's going to pitch right before they pitch. I mean, because you've been there so many times. So knowing how to train, this applies to our business. We know what we need to do. It is starting and it's getting a plan in place. Yep. And that's a great, we will do another one on the shadow of the former self. That has to be another episode coming up. I think that'll be a great one to approach. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today in this Life Transitions for an Athlete. I felt like this was an important series, especially with your background. You have, Greg can add a lot to our podcast, but this is a big one, I think, for a lot of people right now that are facing this, especially after shutdowns and not playing and, what happens to the body. So make sure you subscribe to the newsletter. There's an article with every single podcast. And that is goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter. Again, goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter. Did I say that slow enough?
Yes.
Yes. I usually speed right through that. You can get my books. The Summit was the latest, and the Women at Halftime. Great books, and plenty of programs. So look at my websites, DeborahJohnsonSpeaker.com, DJ Works Music. Everyone loves to go there, but also the goalsforyourlife.com. So thank you so much for being with us today. This has been such fun, and we will be back together again next month, but every single week there's a new episode coming out, a new show, and I have another guest coming in once a month too, so make sure you click in. So thanks so much again, and bye for now. Thank you for joining us. It is because of our wonderful listeners like you that we keep going strong week after week. We'd love it if you'd share and follow us to not miss a single show, and even write a review. You can also find all of our articles, products, and links at womenathalftime.com.